Welcome to this program, Ervin Laszlo, Champion for Peace, a program for the 2023 International Peace Week, which will be both a tribute to Dr. Ervin Laszlo's life and work and a preview of his two 2023 books with the Light on Light Press. The Survival Imperative, Upshifting to Conscious Evolution, published in April 2023, and The Great Upshift, Humanity's Coming Advance Toward Peace and Harmony on the Planet, which will appear in October on the day of the Global Oneness Summit. I'm Dr. Kurt Johnson from Light on Light. In this program, we'll be sharing two videos from Dr. Laszlo, and I and Dr. Robert Atkinson will be commenting further on Dr. Laszlo's amazing life and work. Celebrated concert pianist, philosopher, and system scientist, twice nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, an author of over 100 books and over 400 publications. We'll begin with Dr. Laszlo discussing the points of his Manifesto on Planetary Consciousness. Conceived in 1995 in discussions with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and others, and published in 1996. It is a wonderful window into Dr. Laszlo's life and work.
At the end of the last century, feels like a long time ago, in 1994, I was on a visit to India, to the Auroville Foundation, at which time I was heading the commission, the board of the foundation. At the same time, the Dalai Lama was on a visit to nearby Chennai, the former Madras. I asked for a courtesy visit to say hello. And he received me, and I started talking at his request what my current plans are. I said, I'd like to develop a manifesto about the need for a new consciousness. He said, how does it sound? And I began to recite some of the lines that we have drafted. His Holiness then stopped all his appointments for that afternoon. His secretary was sitting next to him, and he said, let's see about this manifesto. We started drafting it. And at the end of the afternoon, by evening, we had the basic text of what became the Manifesto on the Spirit of Planetary Consciousness. And that manifesto, then a year later, in 1996, has been formally adopted by the Club of Budapest. And we had very many highly regarded luminaries here joining together to sign it. Now, what's the point of this manifesto? And why is it still so very timely today? Probably more timely than ever. Because it talks about a new consciousness, a planetary consciousness. Now, what does that mean? At the time, we had to explain it. People didn't understand. Now, of course, there's much more understanding of it. We mean by it a consciousness that corresponds to ourselves, to us, as members of a planetary community, as a representative of the great sweep, the great wave of evolution on Earth. And this manifesto ends with this call for a new consciousness, for a planetary consciousness, for evolution. And since then, I've been representing this call for a new evolution where we are part of nature, part of what is happening here. The universe is not a passive background. The universe is an active, developing organism, also a living organism. And certainly the planet, and within the planet, the biosphere, is like a living organism, and we are a part of it. Now we need to become a true and correct part of it. In the past few decades, perhaps a century and a half, we have lost our footing. We have lost our right to be part of the great sweep of evolution, of progress in nature, in biosphere, in the universe. We have gone our own way. We have been seduced, as it were, with the new technologies. We thought anything that can be done should be done, and everything that can be done and will be done can be sold for money. And so it will bound to benefit something or somebody. Actually, it doesn't. Not everything that we can make benefits everything and everybody. Sometimes it's a very short-term benefit, which has negative side effects. We've got to look at the whole situation and the whole planet. What is good for life? What is good for the flourishing of life on the planet is good for each one of us. And that's this new spirit, that the spirit of finding our way. Here we are today, just after a tremendous shock, the shock of a pandemic, a global epidemic that involves all of us, the entire human family. Every bit of the earth, or the surface of the earth, was exposed to this virus. It still is present in many parts. And we have learned something from it. We should have learned something. We cannot take nature as for granted. We cannot just do anything with it. We have to learn to be a part of it. And now we have a choice. We can go back, or we can go forward. We cannot stay as we are now. We are in a transition period. But we have learned that what we have had before was not the best of all possible worlds, to say the least. It was imperfect in many ways, subject to crisis, subject to breakdowns. Now we have to learn to live truly on this earth, coming back to normalcy. But the normalcy is not the normal of the past century or century and a half. That was out of the norm. We have got to find a new norm. The new norm is the old norm, where life on earth can flourish. What do we have to learn? I can put it in a few words. We have to learn to be coherent. Coherent within ourselves. If all our cells, all our organs are coherent with each other, we are healthy. That's the definition of cell, definition of health. If any part of our body is not coherent with the rest, it becomes a disease. If it just keeps pushing its own interests, reproducing, becomes a cancer. You've got to learn to be coherent in us. That's health. But we've also got to learn to be coherent with the world around us, with each other, and learn to be one with the world, to be coherent inside and out. That's what we call super coherence. And that takes me to the Club of Budapest. Because I've suggested a few years ago, and this is still the main topic for the Club of Budapest, with its 24 member clubs worldwide, to become, as Gandhi said, what we want to see in the world. We want to see higher levels of coherence. We want to see a super coherence. We want to see a world of collaboration, of coordination, of oneness, motivated by love. And that's what we have to become ourselves. What we become is what the world can become, what we could become. That's our great task. The Club of Budapest is dedicated to it. I'm dedicated to it. That's my life's mission. I try to be coherent to the best of my ability in myself, keep my health, and be coherent with you, the viewers, with all people around me, with the whole community of life on this globe. If we can do that, we can go forward. We don't have to stay as we were. We are pushed out of that sameness, that status quo. We have been jerked, pushed, pulled out of it by the virus. Now here we are, open again, new world, a new era for us. A new era where we can be collaborated, where we can be one, where we can be motivated by a sensation of belonging, sensation of being one, of a living biosphere within a living universe. That's the task. And this is what the Club of Budapest is dedicated to. This is what I am dedicated to. And this is the spirit of planetary consciousness, more relevant, more important today than ever before.
Thank you. In this next video, Dr. Laszlo is joined by his co-author and co-editor of the October 2023 book, The Great Upshift, Dr. David Lorimer. And Dr. David Lorimer hosts Dr. Laszlo in this colorful retrospective on his life and work, entitled David Lorimer in Conversation with Ervin Laszlo, From Concert Pianist to Systems Philosopher, originally from the podcast series Imaginal Inspirations. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Imaginal Inspirations podcast with me, David Lorimer, where I talk to my guests about experiences, people, and books that have shaped their lives and work. Imaginal cells are responsible for the metamorphosis of the caterpillar into a butterfly, which is the Greek symbol for the soul. These cells are dormant in the caterpillar, but at a critical point of development, they create the new form and structure, which becomes the butterfly. My guest today is Professor Ervin Laszlo, who I've known for many years. Ervin spent his childhood in Budapest and was a celebrated child prodigy on the piano, with public appearances from the age of 9. He received a grand prize at the International Music Competition at Geneva, which meant he could leave Hungary and begin an international concert career, first in Europe and then in America. Shifting to the life of a philosopher and systems scientist, he's lectured at various universities in the US, including Yale and Princeton. He's the founder and president of both the Club of Budapest and the Laszlo Institute for New Paradigm Research. He's the author, co-author, or editor of over 100 books that have been published in a total of 25 languages. Ervin Laszlo has also written several hundred papers and articles in scientific journals and popular magazines, and he's a member of numerous scientific bodies, including the International Academy of Science, the World Academy of Arts and Science, the International Academy of Philosophy of Science, and the International Medici Academy. And he was elected a member of the Hungarian Academy of Science in 2010. Ervin was awarded the Sorbonne's highest degree, the Doctorat et Lettres et Sciences Humaines, in 1970, and has received honorary PhDs from the United States, Canada, Finland, and Hungary. He was the recipient of the Peace Prize of Japan, the Goi Award in 2001, of the International Mandia Peace Prize for Assisi in 2005, and of the Luxembourg World Peace Prize in 2017, and was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004 and 2005. Ervin, welcome to Imaginal Inspirations, and thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me.
David, you're wonderful, one of the most wonderful imaginal persons that I've known, and it's a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, that's very kind. The first question I usually ask my guests is a shaping moment involving your choice of work. But I think in your case, it involves at least two shaping moments, one musical and the other philosophical. So maybe you'd like to begin with the musical and then move on to the philosophical and scientific.
I was thinking back on possible moments. I can't identify a single moment that would have that whole catalytic function of moving from one kind of a life path to another. It's a progression. Then there was a final movement which consolidated it. There was a progression. You see, if I think back how it all started, I was, as you mentioned, a concert pianist, a prodigy. That means I never attended school in a regular way. In fact, I had practically no formal schooling at all. I was always taken as on a separate road, a bit outside. I wasn't encultured into anything. And then came the war, which was total upset. We just managed to survive in 1945. And then I left when I was 15. I went to Geneva for a music competition, as you mentioned. So all a series of events that were shaking me always out of the ordinary. So I got into the habit of being outside, looking in, and asking myself, is that the way it really is? It's a bad habit. And that's a kind of a habit that leads to philosophy. But it's something that I pursued. I could never simply accept things just the way they were given to me. And when these things culminated in an experience, which was a kind of a stock-taking experience. It was on a New Year's Eve. My first son, Christopher, was just then 1 year old. And my wife, Marjorie, who's now call herself Carita because she has both names, actually. And we were in a vacation for a few days at Garmisch-Partenkirchen, the famous German Alps. And I took stock. I was again outside of the world, as it were, up a mountain peak, looking down at the lit up resort town. And I asked myself, it's midnight coming, a new year is starting. Could that be that a new phase in my life is also starting? So I asked myself, where am I? What am I doing? Is that what I want to continue doing? And surprisingly, for a concert pianist, particularly one who was doing fairly well, I said no. And that's not just what I want to do. I think I love music and I love performing, but that's not what all I want to do in life. So I said, what then? Now, you see, I always questioned things. And here the idea came to me that perhaps I should look after this questioning. See if I start talking to people who are really into this, who are professors, who are published authors, and so on, about talking about science and philosophy in those fields, who might have some answers. I said to myself, let's start by looking at the possibilities that the world of the senses is not the whole world that there is. Maybe there is something behind it. I found amazing experiences while I was playing the piano and playing together with others, especially playing for a public. It's getting you out of the ordinary routine things into a different dimension of the world, it seemed. I said, is there also a deeper dimension in the world altogether? Is that all, not all there is what we all experience every day? So on that moment, it got this Partenkirche, and I said to myself, and I also said to my wife, who thought I got a bit out of my mind, but pianists can have these ideas sometimes. I asked myself, what shall I do? Okay, seriously, start reading, start attending university courses and so on. This was in the mid-1950s. I was already in my mid-20s. And I never attended a course. I never took an exam in a course before, but now I started visiting courses, first in Munich and then in New York. At that moment, I decided to do that seriously. And that, I think, looking back, was the key moment when I decided to shift it around. Asking these questions, which later turned out to be philosophical, scientific questions, for me were world curiosity questions. That was, in a way, my hobby, whereas music was my profession. The shift was to make music into the hobby and make this into the profession. That came a few years after that, when I already published my first book by a set of surprising coincidences. But that was out, and it got into the hands of the chairman of the Yale Philosophy Department, John Schrader, and he asked me to come to Yale. And I said, well, that is a complete change. How can I be, as a concert pianist, do anything in the philosophy department? But John said, I've read your book, and it's full of ideas, and I'd like you to develop these ideas. And there are many people at Yale who will be interested in developing that. So I went, and that became, in a way, the second movement, the move then from being a hobby thinker to being sort of an academic kind of a thinker. And so that's teaching courses was so funny, David. I started teaching courses even though I wasn't attending those, never myself. I didn't even know how exams are given, I had to kind of ask around. And always afraid of my students finding out that I not really have a thorough background in what I'm teaching. When I'm teaching those courses, because I read the books and I thought I can talk about them. Anyway, this is in a capsule form.
Well, indeed. And I think what's so interesting is the influence of your not having had this formal schooling, which enabled you to question more deeply and really take your own path.
Exactly, yes.
So, and also to think independently. But in this process, Ervin, did you have an influential mentor or mentors in your family or beyond your family to sort of help guide you on your way?
Well, somebody who launched me on my way was the elder brother of my mother, who lived in the same large apartment house in Budapest, who was an amateur philosopher. He would have liked to be a professional philosopher, but he didn't have the degrees for it at the time, but he devoted his life to that. He was actually a literary person and a musician. He had a string quartet that was regularly meeting and giving concerts. He was working together with my father at the family enterprise, which is the shoe factory. But his love was philosophy, the German philosophers especially, the skeptical philosophers. He was a very skeptical person himself, always questioning, always asking, not trusting anything really, except his own thinking, his own intuitions. So my uncle, Stephen, called István in Hungary, used to take me out on walks when I was, God knows, I was 12, 13, 14 years old. We lived across from a park, from the city park in Budapest, and we went out for long walks. And he talked to me, and I was fascinated by the questions that he asked. A lot of it I didn't understand, didn't bother, but I thought, well, there are these questions to be asked. I must say, when I left Hungary, when I was 15, and got to Geneva, to the music competition, and went on. And I lived the life of a concert pianist until I was then about 25, 26, when the other experience happened. In between, I forgot about these these questions, but they were brought back by always the best thing that can bring these new phases of life into existence, by a girlfriend in Budapest, in New York, rather. A set of young people, of whom this girl was one, whom I almost married actually at the time, but a lovely, serious woman who asked similar questions and was very much deeply into Proust and Virginia Woolf and other persons like this, and got me on a path of trying to formulate my ideas in writing. I attended school at the New School for Social Research in New York, and I attended classes in creative writing, and I tried to express my ideas in fiction form. There was this next phase in my life in which I tried to also put down in written form things that I thought about. But that still didn't get me to the point which came later, when I realized, to my astonishment, that what I'm writing could be of interest to somebody else as well. Mm. And that was by chance. I met a gentleman who turned out to be a publisher, an editor for a publishing house in Holland, Martinus Nijhoff. And he published my own notes, which at the same time I wrote only for myself and for my friends, my friends in New York primarily. So it was a series of events. And they led me, as though by a thin line, a leitmotif, as they would say,
yes,
toward asking questions and formulating answers. And then it's the beginning of the idea of writing down for others. It's just the beginning of the idea of communicating, or to be, as in a slightly exaggerated way, saying, of teaching. I never thought of myself as a teacher. I just wrote for myself. And I was happy if I could communicate it and it was of interest to others.
And then were you also continuing to read, or not very much, during your time as a concert pianist, or did you really get going into books at a slightly later stage?
Well, when I decided, and this famous movement, to be serious about my interest, I went to a bookstore. And I asked, what are your books on philosophy? And they gave me one book. Actually, they must not give me. I looked at the shelves, and they showed me where the philosophy books are. And I picked one out, more or less at random. But it was a book by an Indian philosopher. I was always very sympathetic to the Indian thinking, the most spiritual thinking. And he wrote a book which I think was called Related Multiplicity. It was a Whiteheadian book, and he quoted heavily Whitehead. I read this book. It was the first book in philosophy that I actually read. Then I saw I had better trace this further and go to the roots of it. And he quoted Whitehead, so I should read Whitehead. I went back. I read this day and night. I went back a couple of days later, and I said, I want a book by Whitehead. They came to the shelves and they put a book in my hand. It was called Process and Reality.
Oh, wow. That's the real thing, isn't it?
To a young boy, a middle-aged, I was by that time, of course, I was 30, not so young. But somebody who was absolutely new to this whole field I didn't realize what a pretentious, ambitious idea this is to get into process and reality. But I didn't know any better, so I started on page 1 and I read through until page 350 or whatever it was, and then became a Whiteheadian. It made a tremendous impression on me. It was difficult to understand. I had to read through things several times. But I started thinking like that in Whiteheadian process terms. Nothing is, everything is flowing, everything is coming into being. Everything is being by how it relates to other things, and all things together bring forth any one thing. So all these ideas made a profound interest in me. I consider myself a Whiteheadian, and to some extent I consider myself that still. But certainly it was a metaphysics which was not the end station for my thinking, but it was a key element of trying to see things, the world as a coherent whole that interacts and evolves. That is still my thinking today.
Well, that's a very good starting point. And it reminds me, I read Whitehead's Process and Reality exactly 40 years ago in Leipzig when I was there. But I did a similar thing, Ervin, in 1974. I arrived in London and I went to Foyle's bookshop to see what sort of books I could find, and two of the books I found were by Radhakrishnan, who was a philosopher and president of India, and one of them was an idealist view of life, and so I did rather the same thing as you. I just sat down and read it, and Radhakrishnan has in fact had a huge influence on my thinking, and I admire his career. And he's one of the most distinguished, or if not the most distinguished Indian philosopher of the 20th century. So I love the serendipity of the books that are influential. Is there any other book or books you'd like to mention at this point which were important in the development of your own thinking?
Well, yes. Van Bertalanffy, particularly. The biologist who went beyond the limits of this biology science and talked about systems, whether they are biological or social or physical or chemical systems or galactic systems, general systems. And this opened a whole new phase also in my thinking. I met Van Bertalanffy when I was at Yale for the semester, the imitation of John Schrader. And I was impressed by his thinking. And he, in turn, read some of my notes, and we started working together. He wrote then the preface, the introduction to my Introduction to Systems Philosophy, a book that I was working on for at least 5 years nonstop. And it expresses my key ideas at the time. So also, I would say, yes, systems thinking, and then Prigozhin's work, Ilya Prigozhin's work, on putting these things into deeply scientific, acceptable scientific terms. So the importance of a coherent world of which we are a part, which evolves, and in which we ourselves can evolve. These are then the series of books that I've read. I didn't read so many as I'm sure that you do. You do an enormous, fantastic amount of reading. I know, following your writings about it. But what I read usually quite slowly, and I tried to digest it. And if I liked it, if it said something to me, then it became somehow part of me. Not always doing the fair thing that I should be doing or giving a full bibliographic reference. It just became me. And when I wrote something about my ideas, the traces of other people's ideas were implicit in them.
Yes, sure. And was Bergson also an important figure for you, or rather less so?
I'm sorry, who?
Bergson, Henri Bergson.
Bergson, yes. Evolution, a creative evolution. Absolutely, yes. Of course, this was part of the following up of the Bertalanffy ideas, evolution in all its forms.
Yes, I was thinking that because I know from speaking to Ilya Prigogine that Bergson was an influence on his thinking and also on Rupert Sheldrake's. When Rupert was at Cambridge, he read Matter and Memory, and it completely changed his view of reality. And so I've had various conversations with him about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Ervin, how did you come across and formulate your idea of the Akashic field?
I think it was a chance remark. Probably by a spiritual person, it may well have been an Indian, who said that what I'm talking about, he said to me, what you are talking about, he said to me, is really the Akasha, this other dimension, which the Indians call the Akasha. I said, oh, really? I was talking Akasha. And when I talk about a field, was that the Akashic field? So I woke up to this idea after I formulated the main principles, the idea that what I'm talking about has really been documented, has been part of intuition. And this was also the beginning of a deeper relationship with Indian philosophy. You mentioned Radha Krishna. To this day, I have a very strong sense of my thinking along the lines of the Indians. And that leads me to mention, I think that I was very pleased to know about, to receive. And just a few weeks ago, you mentioned, just now, of course, you mentioned about my honorary degrees, which complement the fact that I didn't have until much later a regular degree. I got the 5th honorary degree was from India, which I just got a few weeks ago. And that gives me particular pleasure because that means that the Indians feel the same way that I do, that I feel very related to them. And it seems that they're also relating to my ideas. So this was a very source of great satisfaction to me. I think that the roots of these ideas go back into thousands of years to the Ayurvedic traditions, to the Vedas and so on. These are all, I feel, are really implications and explications of deep truths way beyond the level of our senses.
And I think the Indians were really investigating, deeply investigating consciousness, way before it was fashionable to do so in the West.
Yes, indeed. But coming from music, in my case, consciousness was so obviously in the forefront. What I was doing was not simply physical exercise. I'm moving my fingers, yes, and I'm looking at notes and studying things, how to play them. But what is happening to me was changing my consciousness, was altering it, was entering into another state. Because I was always interested in things I didn't understand. That's why if I understood it already, then why bother with it? But I was always interested in things that I wanted to know more about. And one of the things that I wanted to know more about what happens when you enter altered states of consciousness. And then we came across the writings of Stanislav Grof, among others, who then became a good friend. And I have to start to think of the name transpersonal. You have the transpersonal philosophy, transpersonal psychology that he called, and that is very much going into depths. Then discovering quantum physics, where the depths is really a full surface dimension, the implicate order, which was there before the explicate order. The explicate order grows out of that. All of these are ideas that come together and say that what I am is really a very conscious agent, an agent of consciousness in the world, not somebody who has the pretension of generating consciousness in the brain, but somebody who is trying to use the brain as a decoder of consciousness, which is the more ultimate, the deeper level of reality.
Indeed. And when you're experiencing music, and obviously you experience it differently as a player to just listening to it, what are the pieces that strike you as most sublime that you've played yourself?
Well, I would call what musicians call, and I call also, because philosophers and scientists call it that again, it's harmony, which you can express as coherence, which comes to the fore as the surge of one part for another, or pulling together, or becoming one, of the oneness. No, that's the element. Not being separate. And I read sort of a saying by Einstein, gave me very deep respect for him, saying that separateness is an illusion, he said. In the real world, there's nothing is separate from any other thing. That was Whitehead. That's coming through in physics, in quantum physics, more than ever. And that's a confirmation of what I intuited as a musician, of becoming, at least for a moment, for a few moments, becoming one with other people around me, losing my physical body, my physical identity. In fact, while we say that, let me just add this, you are interested in my turning point. One turning point in my life was precisely my losing my sense of physical being to such an extent that when I was actually playing on the concert stage, playing a sonata by Beethoven, I forgot where I am at playing around on that piece, because at the beginning of the second movement comes back at the end of the second movement, and all of a sudden when I woke up, as it were, while playing it, I didn't know, to my great shock, am I playing it now for the first time in the beginning of the movement, or am I playing it for the second time at the end of the movement? And I said, my gosh, I can't go on like this. If you're a pianist, you have to think about your music. And if you're a philosopher, you have to just devote yourself to that, and you can't take on all this engagement. That's when I decided to go to Yale and to leave my pianist career. When I got this shock, it was a real shock experience.
Yes, it certainly put you on the spot. And do you have a favorite piano concerto that you've played? Obviously with orchestras.
You know, I love the simple, harmonious, logical music. That means Mozart, that means Schubert, that means the piano, the earlier works of Beethoven. Asking what favorite piece, if I would be asked, I would say the A major concerto of Mozart and the C major concerto of Beethoven. When you are playing with an orchestra, but you're not separate from the orchestra. It all goes together. It's all very logical. And it all reinforces each other. And it's all simple. I don't think the world is complicated. It's complex, yes, but it's not complicated. Ultimately, if we find it complicated, we just haven't understood it. The world is coherent, and coherence is simple. It's being one. Nothing can be simpler than being one.
No, indeed, Ervin. And I think, just looking at the future of culture, which we're both engaged in with the book that we're editing and the many books that you've written on the topic, I think one of the things we agree on is that we need to prioritize the heart and prioritize love to a much greater extent than we have in our current context and culture. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, it's another great satisfaction that there is in the investigation of the physics and physiology of the heart. It comes through that the heart is not a simple pump of the blood flow through the veins to the brain. The heart actually has its own perceptions and receives information and acts on it and radiates information. Probably its radiation field is thousands of times stronger than that of the brain. So all the work at the Heart-Mouth Institute, among others, confirms that indeed the heart is a mysterious organ. I now think of it as an organ of life, as a life principle itself. It starts beating. Why it starts beating? What makes it start beating in the fetus, for example, at the very beginning? All of a sudden it's there. And life starts when the blood beats. And it continues as long as the heart beats. I think it's a cosmic principle that comes to manifestation in life, in the living organism. And following its guidance, it might be a deep guidance, that's something that the Indians as you have mentioned, Krishna and the great Indian philosopher Aurobindo as well, have followed that the heart is indeed a leading organ, which we are already now becoming to understand that is really that. It's not just a metaphor. Metaphors are important, but this is more than a metaphor. It is true that our heart is a principle of the evolutionary impulse in us. That would be my formulation these days.
Yes, and also we need as a culture to rebalance the emphasis between head and heart, or as Ian McGilchrist put it, between left and right hemisphere, because at the moment we're really overbalanced towards the masculine, towards logical thinking, and we need to balance that, I think, with intuition and a more mystical viewpoint.
Absolutely, yes. I'm trying to contribute to that. Not for me, it's not surprising, because the playing music and entering into that dimension is to entering into the same dimension as the perceptions of the heart. It's not the brain. I could even forget, as I mentioned a moment ago, I could even mention my physical presence while playing, which gave me the shock. But certainly the heart is in the same dimension where creativity is, and where music and where all art is, and the deeper layers of culture, poetry in your case, for example, as a respected, and to my mind, admired and appreciated poet as you are. I appreciate what you can do on those things, and that surely you are following your intuitions, you're following your heart more than following a calculated attempt through the brain.
No, very much so, and that's the aesthetic experience in general. And then, do you have any favorite proverbs or quotes that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I suppose there are many that's very influential in my life. The one I keep coming back to when I talk to people about the need to change, the need to evolve, they keep coming back to Gandhi. There's so many great sayings, among them this famous saying of "be the change that you want to see in the world." I'm very much aware that a true communication, a true artist, doesn't make other people feel something. He or she feels it, is that thing, and then it communicates it.
Yes, it's also like Schweitzer, who said there are only three ways of changing the world. The first is through example, the second is through example, and the third, you've guessed it, is through example.
Being the change. You know, I noticed already in my musician days that musicians, especially the conductors, who interpret a piece of music, they don't do it by instructing the musicians or the co-musicians or partners. They start living the music, and it's contagious. It carries forward. I was aware at the time of Herbert von Karajan, who was conducting with closed eyes. He didn't look at people and say, "Come a little bit stronger here now, and a bit diminuendo over there." No, he was simply living it. And a great orchestra, that the Vienna and the Berlin orchestras and the others that he was dealt with, could understand that, could feel that, could themselves become that. There's the big difference. I think Collingwood, the philosopher, talked about this difference between the artist and the medical doctor. Doctors who prescribe things and make other people do things or feel things or be things, and the artist who is that thing, and then lets the others participate in that feeling, in that being.
Yeah, that's a wonderful insight. And did you ever come across Sergiu Celibidache or not?
His name, yes, and I think I have his recordings. I've never met him.
Now that's a pity, because a friend introduced me to his recordings and his biography, and it's quite extraordinary. In fact, he was at an earlier point, he was also the conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic. When Furtwängler had to take leave. So and I think his the way that he was the music when he was getting people to, for instance, play the second movement, the scherzo of the Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, is quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I think all great musicians, the same as great scientists, are not just doing something to them and to others. they are becoming something. And that's why Gandhi is saying it says so much to me, because they are becoming the change that we want, that we need. If somebody can become like that, then other people around him or her are likely to pick it up. It's a question of resonance. It's a question of responding less to a tuning fork and starting to vibrate in the same way.
Very much, Ervin. And my final question is there any advice from where you are now that you give to your younger self?
Advice that I would give to others?
No, to your younger self.
Or to my younger selves, I see. Oh, gosh. I was pretentious. And maybe it was a good thing. I mean, I imagine that I can tackle questions that are still open questions, that I could look after it. I was sure that not everything that can be known is already known. It's very pretentious for a young man. I thought there was I could teach philosophy with some ideas, some sense of I'm coming across ideas that others have not come across yet, or certainly didn't communicate to me. Very pretentious. It's bold, courageous, if you like. It's extraordinary or exaggerated, perhaps. But I lived like that. I was not part of any established group, whether musical group or other groups. I had friends, but I was not encultured, as I mentioned earlier. I was not encultured into any given set of cultures or expression of cultures. And so I could always ask these things. And I asked things that I wanted to ask, which in retrospect is really extremely bold and aspirational on the part of a young person.
Well, it's that boldness and curiosity and confidence that's made you who you are, Ervin. And so I think be good advice to give yourself would, be as confident as you were and look at the result. So thank you so much for joining me on Imaginal Inspirations.
Wonderful, David. You are continued to be also an inspiration for me, and I enjoy our contact and our work together. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. David Lorimer and Dr. Ervin Laszlo. So next we're joined by Dr. Robert Atkinson, a managing editor at Light on Light Books and a 3-time Nautilus Award winner for the books The Story of Our Time, Our Moment of Choice, and A New Story of Wholeness. Dr. Atkinson will give us a peek into both of Dr. Laszlo's 2023 books, The Survival Imperative and The Great Upshift. So over now to Dr. Robert Atkinson.
Hello, this is Robert Atkinson from Light on Light Press and author of The Story of Our Time and A New Story of Wholeness. It's been a real pleasure and honor to work with Ervin Laszlo this year on his 2 new books, The Survival Imperative and The Great Upshift. He's been at the leading edge of systems thinking for over a half-century, bringing into popular discourse concepts like planetary consciousness, which now has its many derivatives, like a consciousness of oneness or world citizenship or unitive consciousness. All these terms are the signs of a transformation of consciousness that is quickening the pace of change in the world toward a realization of our inherent harmony, unity, and wholeness. The lifelong work of Ervin Laszlo has contributed so much to our collective and evolving awareness of how tied together all things are, and how critical it is to our survival and well-being to live in this consciousness, so we can be one thriving human family. After more than 100 books, his latest 2 books have an essential and particularly timely message for humanity today. The Survival Imperative addresses humanity's greatest need at this time, raising the level of our individual and collective consciousness to bring about the betterment of the whole. It shows us how to take informed action toward this unfoldment of consciousness. In this book, you'll discover the solutions to ensuring the well-being of humanity. It offers scientifically based perspective on where we are, where we're headed, and exactly what is called for at this critical juncture of our existence, which is an upshift to higher levels of order and coherence to keep us on our evolutionary path. This book lays out why this upshift is needed, what inner and outer resources we possess to draw upon, and what the action steps are that will move us toward this achievable vision of well-being and wholeness. An extra bonus is an inclusive list of worldwide conscious organizations that are already contributing to this vision. This book is essential reading for completing the process of global transformation already underway. Jean Houston said of this book, "This is destined to be one of the most important and potent books of our time." And Greg Braden said of it, "Laszlo's book catapults us beyond simply knowing that today's world is in the final throes of a dangerously unsustainable path. It provides a mind map to empowering a new world." What you can expect to find in this book is quite remarkable. From the why, the where to, and the how of upshifting our conscious evolution, to where we are today and where we are going, to why we need to upshift, to the nature of consciousness, which we can upshift to a clear sense of the conscious evolution scenario, to all the steps needed to be taken for informed action, like valuing diversity and upgrading your spirituality. The book culminates with a clear and achievable vision of this new social order. And this is just part of the richness of the survival imperative. And then coming out in October is The Great Upshift, which shows us there is nothing more important right now than peace and harmony on the planet. This vital book addresses this greatest of needs by identifying the specific ways our individual and collective consciousness can and must be upshifted through the participation of all of us. Deepak Chopra said of this book is the prescription for a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. So this is a remarkable book that includes contributions from 35 of the world's leading thinkers who map a path forward to a bright future, taking us beyond today's crisis and conflict-prone world to a higher stage of our evolution. These essays show us new ways to upshift our individual and collective consciousness to ensure the desired resolution of these crises. Ervin Laszlo and David Lorimer, drawing on their holistic expertise and global network, have assembled a stellar cast of world-renowned scientists and visionaries who illuminate where we are today and where we can go from here. They focus on the most burning question of all: how can we upshift ourselves, our ways of healing, of thinking and feeling, and even of intuiting, to respond to the pressing requirements of our time? Their visions empower us to be the change we want to see in the world, to help others be a positive and critical part of the great upshift that has already started. This compendium of insights into solutions for our world, troubled by climate change, conflict, and unsustainable conditions, calls for the conscious participation of us all to implement the verities within this book. A sampling of the topics you'll find covered so well include myth perceptions, mass extinctions, and the upshift to a new civilization by Bruce Lipton, Our Conscious Revolution by Jude Curvan, Awakening the Power of the New Human Story by Greg Braden, Spiritual Traditions and a Path Toward Peace and Harmony by Karan Singh, Upshifting the Future by Charles Eisenstein, The Upshift Path to a New Paradigm World by Annalise Smitsman, An Upshifted Development Path, The Politics of Being by Thomas Legrand. Transforming a Death Economy into a Life Economy by John Perkins. And Healing the World from the Ground Up by Lynn McTaggart. We at Light on Light Press can think of no one who is a greater lifelong champion of peace than Ervin Laszlo. He was twice nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. He received the Japan Peace Prize, the Goy Peace Award in 2001, and the Assisi Mandir of Peace Prize in 2006. We invite you to look into his two latest books, The Survival Imperative and The Great Upshift. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robert Atkinson, Dr. David Lorimer, and Dr. Ervin Laszlo, and the whole team at Light on Light Press that helped produce these wonderful books. And thank you for joining us. You can see the colorful covers of both of these books and more information about each on the banners that follow just hereafter. Thank you for joining us for International Peace Week, and join us in the prayer, may peace prevail on earth.
Unity Earth,